Carl, Demuted's viewership is down lately, Carl. I can't do anything about it. There's just so few of them left out there. Carl, listen to me. We have to subscribe. We have to. It's for our survival, Carl. If we don't subscribe and watch his uploads, we might be next. I don't want that to happen, Carl. Shane didn't subscribe, and we know how that turns out. I'm gonna hit that subscribe button, Carl. For Judith. For Lori. In fact, I might share it to them as well. If he doesn't hit 70,000 subs before the end of the year, it might be over, Carl. And also be sure to check out his Patreon. A special thanks to the patrons on screen now. Those guys are the only reason we're still alive, Carl. You hear me? We should be dead. And if you want to see your name in the credits of the next video, you'll donate to the Patreon. This is it, Carl. I'm gonna go for a walk now. Sure hope it's not dead. Zombies. As a trope in media, they're everywhere, with our modern interpretations of the undead stemming from George A. Romero's 1968 film, Night of the Living Dead. Funny enough, Romero didn't actually consider that to be a zombie movie at the time, and why would he? They hadn't really been invented yet in that way. He simply thought of them as undead ghouls. Before Romero, zombies had a very different characterization. They stemmed from Haitian folklore. A zombie was a reanimated corpse that was basically a mindless slave, a very different interpretation to the flesh-eating hordes of monsters you likely know them as today. Since 1968, we've seen a ton of zombie movies, shows, comics, books, and all sorts of other different medias. While most zombie movies tended to follow Romero's groundwork for zombies, that being the slow-moving, groaning, bitey types, other types of Z's would eventually form. Nowadays, it feels like there's far more variety in the zombie formula than ever before. The 90s and 2000s really saw the rise of zombies, a type of on-screen zombie whose main gimmick was that they actually ran after people instead of shambling over slowly. Then there's non-humanoid zombies, a bit stretchy on the definition of a zombie per se, but definitely within the same realm. Think of the necromorphs from Dead Space or the zombies from Half-Life. Both stretch the idea of a dead body coming back to life into something a bit further than we're used to seeing, while still definitely being some kind of zombie. There's even a type I'd call non-zombies, where a character or monster is clearly tangentially a zombie, even if that's not what they really are. Think of Nemesis, Mr. X, or the Ganado from Resident Evil. All of these are characters who are kind of zombies, but not really. I bring all this up just to put it in perspective how huge zombies were and still are to an extent. They're one of the most classic types of horror, but being a classic horror monster is kind of a double-edged sword, because while people definitely know what you aren't exactly going to stick out. Oversaturation. Zombie movies are a dime a dozen, sometimes literally. So if you want to stand out, you need to figure out how. And there's one franchise that I think kind of nailed it, and spawned a whole new generation of zombie fans and zombie media. The Walking Dead. I remember watching the first episode of The Walking Dead when it was coming out in 2011. I watched it with my grandparents even. Since then, the series has had 11 seasons of the main show and several spin-offs, including Fear the Walking Dead, and The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon. For those who don't know what the premise is, let me explain. The Walking Dead on AMC is an adaptation of the comic The Walking Dead by Image. The original comic was written by Robert Kirkman, one of the creators of Invincible, who also serves as an executive producer on the show. Rick Grimes is a small-town sheriff's deputy in Georgia, along with his partner, Shane. After taking a bullet during a gunfight, Rick is sent into a coma, only to wake up during the apocalypse. Rick would eventually reunite with his family and a new group of survivors to call his own, but danger is everywhere, whether that be the walkers themselves or hostile groups of other survivors. From here on out, The Walking Dead explores its new world with as much fear and hopelessness as the show can muster. Before we continue with it though, I want to emphasize how the format of The Walking Dead show lends tremendously to its success. Let's say The Walking Dead was a movie. It starts with episode 1 and ends with the group escaping the CDC at the end of season 1. Now, let's say you had to squeeze all of that into a 2-hour runtime. You have to prune a lot of it out to make it work. Characters like Merle would be left out entirely, since they don't really push the plot forward so much as slow it down. We'd get zero characterization out of ones like Dale or Andrea, and we'd see a lot more nameless grunts die in the process. But because The Walking Dead is an 11-season show, It can afford to spend time building characters up, establishing their lives before it kills them off. This also means that when a character dies, it's devastating to the viewer. Let's look at Season 4 of The Walking Dead. Spoilers ahead. Herschel Green is a character who had been around since Season 2, and he's one that most of us knew could not last, especially after an injury in Season 3 leaves him with only one foot. But because we've known Herschel for so long, when he dies at the hands of the governor, the audience feels that loss much more heavily. Compare that to whenever the show introduces characters who are meant to just die, such as Alan or Ben. We don't spend much time with these characters at all, so their deaths don't hit us nearly as much. The same thing would happen in a conventional zombie movie. The television format also allows the show to explore its own world. Think of every zombie movie you've ever seen. Chances are it has one of 3 endings: the hopeless ending, the rescue ending, or the sequel bait ending. The hopeless ending is your Night of the Living Dead type, where the characters all die in the face of adversity and there's no real end to the nightmare in sight. The rescue ending is your World War Z type ending, where a cure is made or some form of global relief to help humanity get back to its feet. The last type of ending is the sequel bait ending. Think of your typical Resident Evil movie. Herein lies the problem of zombie movies. In 2 of these 3 endings, we don't get to have closure. The problem is so much bigger than just our main characters that what happens to them usually doesn't affect the world around them, leaving a lot of the apocalypse untouched and unexplored. But the rescue endings also feel cheap in comparison. I don't know about you, but I always found the cure ending of World War Z to be especially cheap and corny. Just a way to cap off the movie and a way to let the audience know that the story is over. But with the television format of The Walking Dead, there isn't really an ending. There's always another season and the story is always continuing. I think the format is The Walking Dead's biggest strength by and large, enabling the audience to become invested in the world of the show and follow its characters through it. And because the show develops its characters so much, for the most part they totally stand out compared to the rest of the genre. Seeing characters grow and develop is important to any TV drama, but in the circumstances of The Walking Dead, it becomes a lot more interesting. Carl starts out like any kid before becoming a badass gunslinger who can take anyone on. Michonne starts out as a lone wolf type but allows herself to open up to Rick and his family and show her true colors. Carol starts out the abused housewife of Ed but becomes completely stoic and even heartless the longer the show goes on. And Rick? Rick has the most visible change of them all. While Rick starts on the side of humanity, we find out fairly quickly that when push comes to shove, he's more than prepared to kill a man. In fact, it becomes a big piece of his character that he doesn't want Carl to learn his rage. Without Rick, the show would feel totally aimless in how it wants its characters to grow, because they all grow in tangential relation to Rick. And this show gets very powerful with how far it's willing to push Rick. At times you see him slip up from hero to villain and just barely make it back around. One of my favorite examples of this comes from the Season 2 finale, the famous Ricktatorship scene, where he announces to the rest of the group that they have to follow his lead and trust his government or die on their own. To show you this scene without AMC sending a SWAT team to my door, I've decided to dub it over myself. Enjoy. No one is going anywhere. Do something! I am doing something. I'm keeping this group together, alive. I've been doing that all along, and no matter what, I didn't ask for this. I killed my best friend for you people, for Christ's sake. You saw what he was like, how he pushed me, how he compromised us, how he threatened us. He staged the whole Randall thing, led me out to put a bullet in my back. He gave me no choice. He was my friend, but he came after me. My hands are clean. Maybe you people are better off without me. Go ahead. I say there's a place for us, but maybe it's just another pipe dream. Maybe I'm fooling myself again. Why don't you go and find out yourself? Send me a postcard. Well, go on. There's the door. You can do better. Let's see how far you get. No takers? Fine, but get one thing straight. You're staying? This isn't a democracy anymore. But it's also interesting to see Rick pivot back into a hero. His character is one that can absolutely lead scenes like Rictatorship, or he can lead ones like the following scene where he tries to talk the governor down from executing Herschel. We'd never have to see each other till we're all ready.
It could work. You know it could.
It coulda. But it can't. Not after Woodbury. Not after Andrea.
Look, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. The fact is, it's going to be a hell of a lot harder than standing here shooting at each other. But I don't think we have a choice.
We don't. You do.
We're not leaving. You try and force us, we'll fight back. Like you said, the gunshots will just bring more of them out. They'll take down the fences, and without the fences, this place is worthless. Now, we can all live in the prison, or none of us can.
We'll fix the damn fences.
You and the ponytails, is this what you want? Is this what any of you want?
What we want is what you got. Period. Time for you to leave, asshole.
Look, I've fought him before and after we took in his old friends, and they became leaders in what we have here. Now you put down your weapons, walk through those gates. You're one of us. We let go of all of it. And nobody dies.
Nah.
But that's enough about the characters for now. How about the zombies? Earlier, I brought up just how widespread zombies had become in terms of personality. You had the likes of Nemesis alongside fast zombies and necromorphs. But the Walking Dead zombies are much more in line with the type we see initially in the Living Dead trilogy of films. If I had to describe them in terms of their rules and biology, here's how. Walkers, biters, lurkers, whatever you call them, they all stem from a dead person. Later on, it's revealed that anyone who dies during the apocalypse will come back as a walker unless the brain is destroyed. This happens with characters like Shane or Herschel. Otherwise, characters become walkers by being bitten by one. Scratches are also maybe a source of transmission. Characters throughout seem to treat it like it is, but there's not really a point this comes into play in the show. After someone is bitten, it's a matter of time. They will become deathly ill with a fever and may begin hallucinating, drifting in and out of delirium. The best point of reference we have for this is Jim from Season 1, who we stay with from bite until the group leaves him for dead at his request. There is also Bob, but his death in relation to the bite is a bit harder to rationalize because he also lost a leg to the hunters. The fever will eventually kill the victim, and from then the revival time varies heavily. Characters like Amy revive in several hours, while others like Shane seem to revive within minutes of death. Walkers tend to have their faculties intact but inhibited. While many run or crawl, most will walk and hobble around. Some won't even move until provoked. They're also not very intelligent, taking the fastest path to their prey rather than the smartest, meaning they're also very easy to trap or outmaneuver. They also don't feel pain at all. That said, they do seem to have some semblance of intelligence, as they'll often search for people through buildings and corridors, even waiting in place to jump out at them. We've even seen them attempt to use doorknobs, albeit unsuccessfully. Their strongest sense is their sense of smell, going after anything that doesn't have their own smell on them, including animals. This makes one of the strongest methods of defense against them being smell camouflage. Several times throughout the series, characters who are covered in walker blood and viscera are able to successfully sneak through a group. Something else strange about them is that they can lose interest in prey. When Michonne cuts the jaws and arms off of two of them, they no longer want to eat her and simply walk around, acting as her camouflage. All of this to say that the walkers are pretty unremarkable on the outside. They behave just like any other classic horror movie zombie, and they're way less dangerous than your Train to Busan or World War Z zombies. But I think what The Walking Dead did right with these specifically is the scale of the threat. One walker on its own is scary at first, but over time it becomes basically nothing. These characters get desensitized to them. They know their weaknesses and how to protect themselves, but something consistently scary is a group of them, or a herd. One person can kill a walker by themselves, but 10, 20, 100? So the threat becomes less that a zombie might bite you, and becomes more about the never-ending hordes of the undead, and knowing that one day, despite it all, you'll probably end up just like them. It preys on a very different fear than other zombie media. While other franchises will try to make individual zombies scarier to face, The Walking Dead excels at pushing the fear of being outnumbered. It makes the whole show feel extremely lonely, even when our main characters are together. There's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. This is how the world is now, and there's millions of jaws mashing and gnashing to try and kill you in one of the most horrifying ways a human can die. And sure, zombie hordes are nothing new to films like Dawn of the Dead or World War Z, but something important about those movies is that they're built around those hordes being present threats virtually at all times. Herds in The Walking Dead are rarer than individual zombies, but while they're there, they are horrifying. It's the fact that they're always around and traveling that I think makes them especially terrifying. At several points in the series, Rick's entire way of life changes because of an unexpected herd of walkers just appearing one day. So this is what The Walking Dead brings to the table. You have a format that keeps the story going and energetic, giving the viewer more to enjoy and also accentuating the hopelessness of the world being created. Then you have interesting and well-written characters that feel realistic without feeling overly pessimistic. These people want to help each other out and oftentimes have to break through their own limits just to survive. And you wrap it up with a type of zombie that, while weak on its own, becomes a nightmare when you factor in how often they travel in very large groups with one another. These are all things that The Walking Dead does right. What does it do wrong? Well, I think that much of the show, especially in later seasons, steers too far into humanity being its own biggest threat, because I simply don't think that's how it would go down. Sure, charismatic characters like the Governor or Negan would definitely rise up, but how long could their civilizations really go on built on their cruelty to other people? Probably not long in an end-of-the-world scenario, I think. And don't get me started on Gareth, that dude was never leading anyone in a million years, let alone during the end of the world. Walkers end up taking a backseat to these characters, and that's when the show loses me. Because while its character writing is one of, if not its strongest suit, it comes at a cost to the actual main threat that drives the whole show, walkers. They feel diminished in their threat significantly after Negan's introduction to the show. But with all that being said, The Walking Dead as a franchise extends beyond the main show. As I've said before, the show on AMC is based on a comic book from Image, which ran for 193 issues from 2003 to 2019. And if you're more familiar with YouTube Let's Plays, there was also Telltale's Walking Dead series of story-driven decision-based games. Season 1 of the series started in 2012 and saw similar episodic release at first. While the first game follows Lee Everett and his time in the apocalypse, future seasons of the game would follow Clementine, a young girl who Lee rescues. These are also set within the world of the comics and have numerous plot lines that cross over, especially early on. Characters like Glenn and Herschel appear predominantly in Season 1, but it's Lee and Clementine's relationship with one another that I think is the most interesting. This sort of hardened and grizzled survivor who has to care for someone who realistically can't defend themselves. It's a trope that would probably grow more popular with the largest zombie series to come out since The Walking Dead, The Last of Us. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouths and I don't have any real proof of this, but I have a feeling that if The Walking Dead on AMC didn't come out when it did, or wasn't as big as it ended up being, I don't think The Last of Us would have had as big of an impact as it had. Audiences were primed for more zombie content, and by and large I feel like The Last of Us delivered. At first anyway. Look, I'm not here to gripe about my issues with The Last of Us as a franchise because I guarantee you've heard all of my issues before. Namely, how that first game keeps getting recycled over and over. It's a series obsessed with its breakout first entry that they keep pretending is still fresh and new. And now they plan to do the same with the second game. Regardless of my stance on the franchise from that perspective, I do have to admit that I adore The Last of Us as a story and as a world. That said, I don't want to claim The Last of Us copies The Walking Dead, or that it's even inspired by it. I just think the size of that franchise comes from an audience being ready to see new and interesting zombie media after being introduced to The Walking Dead. However, I do want to say that a piece of The Walking Dead franchise is incredibly fucking interesting in relation to The Last of Us. So, the story of The Last of Us has a girl named Ellie follow around Joel. Ellie might be humanity's last hope at survival, as she's somehow immune to the cordyceps that turn other people into zombies from a single bite. So together, Joel and Ellie travel to try and keep her safe. This is also basically what happens in The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon, a show that only recently came out. Daryl winds up in France and meets a group of nuns who have a boy immune to the zombie virus. The reason given is that his mother was bitten, and he was born just before she turned, giving him a sort of built-in genetic immunity. This setup just feels really, really similar to The Last of Us. Now, I'm also not saying that Daryl Dixon copied The Last of Us. There is going to be no accusation of plagiarism here, but it's just such a specific plotline that coincidentally also exists in the other biggest zombie franchise right now, and I felt like I had to bring it up because it gave me a good laugh. And aside from The Last of Us, I feel like The Walking Dead in general just paved the way for new zombie media to rise up, whether that be through inspiration or just successfully proving the formula was still viable. WWZ and Warm Bodies immediately came to mind for me from movies, but I think the effect on video games can also not be understated. 7 Days to Die, DayZ, Dead Island, Dead State, Dying Light, The Evil Within, No More Room in Hell, State of Decay, Unturned, all of these released in pretty close proximity to The Walking Dead, and a lot of them I can guarantee were part of that zombie craze. As a genre, it was even big enough that Nintendo thought they could test the waters on the Wii U with one of these games, creating the long-forgotten Zombie U. Can we thank The Walking Dead for all of these? Definitely not, but we can thank it for showing the entertainment industry that people still really want to see zombies. We just want to see them in new and unique ways. Before The Walking Dead, zombies were predictable and easily stale, to the point where they were essentially fodder for any media. Left 4 Dead as a series is built around the idea that a zombie apocalypse can be pretty fun to blast through with friends and crack jokes during. But then you go down the line and see games like Plants vs. Zombies or Minecraft incorporating zombies and making them overly goofy and non-threatening. Even the COD series was just using them as filler enemies for a wave-based gameplay mode, one which would go on to be its own selling point in most future COD releases. Let me put it like this. Before The Walking Dead, zombies were in dire need of something new to revitalize the genre, and were fairly often the butt of common media's jokes. They weren't scary, and existed just to be killed by whatever badass main character writers could think up. Then The Walking Dead comes out, plays itself completely straight and seriously, and gives us a new way to enjoy zombies in a way that hadn't been done at that scale and that successfully before. Which leads us to after The Walking Dead. Sure, parody zombies are still around like Lollipop Chainsaw, and it didn't really have a long-standing effect on existing franchises like Resident Evil, but it also opened audiences up to newer, fresher zombie shows, movies, and games that I would say for the most part ended up being very popular. Seriously, try to name a zombie game that takes itself as seriously as The Last of Us does that came out before 2011. Now, are we still in this sort of zombie revival as this video will probably be titled? I'd say not really. Don't get me wrong, some zombie projects do slip through the cracks and become mainstream successes. Some of these are also remakes of one of the greatest video games of all time, go figure. But as a whole, I think we're back in that period of dryness. Games like Days Gone or Back 4 Blood definitely could have been successes, but not only are those games meh at best, I think as a society many consumers just have outgrown zombies. I'd say this era started dying down around the time of 2015 to 2017, when they went back to just being fringe enemy types for the next COD game. Which means this era is really only like 7 years at best, but hey, that's longer than the Confederacy. Even The Walking Dead itself isn't immune to the changing times. Although the main show was huge and remains one of the greatest TV shows of all time in my opinion, just look at these spin-offs and tell me there's a god. Fear the Walking Dead. Cool, a side story in the Walking Dead universe that takes us out of Georgia to explore another place in America. Decent, The Walking Dead Beyond. Okay, it's The Walking Dead from the latter half of the show, showing us the next generation of survivors. Not really necessary, but why not? The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon, a continuation of a fan favorite character because we definitely needed one of those. It's not like Daryl was there for all 11 seasons of the main show. The Walking Dead, The Ones Who Live. Not even out yet, but would this not literally just be The Walking Dead 2? Jesus Christ, we're up to The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 2 The Book of Carol. This sounds like one of those made up titles from The Onion that they would come up with to say the franchise has gotten too big. The comic itself I think hyped out at the right time, although we did get a fun what-if spin-off type of event with Rick Grimes 2000, a comic showing what would happen if Rick Grimes suddenly became a badass sci-fi superhero. Get Andrew Lincoln in Tights AMC and my life is yours. So there you have it, the cultural zombie revival The Walking Dead started, and the impact it left in its wake. I had a good time with The Walking Dead, even if it does get tedious down the pipeline. In any case, I hope you have a happy Halloween, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss whatever I post next. I'm Demuted. Peace.